All right, let's talk about an invention that didn't just change the battlefield, but really shaped the entire story of the American West. We're talking about the revolver. And trust me, this was so much more than just another gun. It was a piece of tech that became a symbol of power, of justice, and of the wild, untamed frontier. Now, to really get why the revolver was such a game changer, you have to picture what things were like before it existed. I mean, imagine you're in the middle of a fight. You've got a single-shot pistol, you fire once, and now the clock is ticking. You've got 20 long seconds of fumbling around with powder and a lead ball, all while you're staring down an enemy. That 20 seconds? That was a massive and often deadly weak spot. So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll dive into the origins of the revolver itself. Then, we'll see how it just exploded across the Wild West. After that, we'll look at its military and global impact. We'll also unpack how it became this huge cultural symbol. And finally, we'll see what its legacy looks like today. So, let's get started right at the beginning. Our story kicks off where so many American stories do, on the frontier. You see, the early Texas Republic was a rough, tough place. And for the Texas Rangers, the technology they had just wasn't cutting it. And this really lays out the life-or-death difference we're talking about. The Rangers, with their one-shot pistols, were just getting overwhelmed by Comanche warriors, who could unleash a whole flurry of arrows in the time it took a Ranger to reload, just once. But then, the first multi-shot revolvers show up, and suddenly a handful of Rangers could lay down a constant, devastating wave of fire. The entire balance of power on the frontier, it changed, like overnight. But you know, this journey from a simple idea to an absolute icon didn't happen in a flash. It all started way back in 1831. A young Samuel Colt is on a ship, he sees how the ship's wheel works, and boom, inspiration strikes. He carves a wooden prototype. By 1836, he gets a patent for his Patterson model. But the real turning point? That comes in 1846, when a battle-tested Texas Ranger, Captain Samuel Walker, sits down with Colt. He's got a list of demands, stuff he learned the hard way in combat. And that meeting, that collaboration, is what led directly to the legendary Colt Walker in 1847. And here they are, Captain Walker's demands. This wasn't just some wish list. This was a recipe for the perfect fighting handgun, straight from the field. He said, look, we need 6 shots, not 5. We need a heavier, harder-hitting .44 caliber bullet. Give us a real trigger guard for better control, not that flimsy folding thing. We need actual sights we can use. And for God's sake, let us reload it without having to take the whole thing apart. These 6 tweaks took the revolver from a cool novelty and turned it into the most powerful sidearm on the planet. Now, the revolver didn't stay just a military weapon for very long. No way. It spread like wildfire and quickly became the gun of the American West, in the hands of pretty much everyone, from lawmen to cowboys to outlaws. You started hearing this saying pop up all over the frontier, and it really gets to the heart of something important. In a place where just staying alive could depend on your ability to fight back, the revolver was seen as the great equalizer. It meant that one person, regardless of how big or strong they were, could stand their ground against a bigger threat. And the king of them all was the Colt Single-Action Army, the Model 1873. It became so common, so iconic, that it got a nickname, the Peacemaker, which, of course, is pretty ironic considering how many conflicts it was a part of. Fun fact, it was actually Captain Walker himself who first called his design a Peacemaker in a letter to Colt, and the name just kind of stuck. And the Peacemaker wasn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It came in different versions for different jobs. You had the long-barreled cavalry model for soldiers on horseback. Then there was the slightly shorter artillery model. The most popular one was probably the gunfighter length for, well, lawmen and outlaws. And you even had the short, easy-to-hide sheriff's model for folks like bankers and storekeepers. So the revolver's success wasn't just an American thing. It quickly became a standard weapon for armies all over the globe. But of course, with that wider use came new rivals and new problems. Yeah, Colt wasn't the only game in town. Smith & Wesson came out with the Schofield revolver, which you see right here, and it had a killer feature, a top break design. That meant you could snap it open and eject all 6 empty shells at once. It was way faster to reload than the Colt, where you had to poke each one out individually. But all this competition created a huge headache for the U.S. Army. See, the Colt fired the long .45 Colt cartridge. The Schofield used a shorter .45 S&W round. Now, you could fire the shorter Schofield round in a Colt if you had to, but there was no way you could cram the longer Colt cartridge into a Schofield. For Army logistics, this was a complete nightmare, and it eventually led them to just standardize on the shorter round for a while before going back to the Colt. But even with these hiccups, the Revolver saw a ton of military action. It was right there with Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders charging up San Juan Hill. It saw service and conflicts all over the world. And even after the Army officially replaced it in 1892, a lot of soldiers still preferred it because it just packed a bigger punch than the new guns. So beyond its use as a tool, the Revolver became a true legend. But the picture most of us have in our heads, well, it's mostly thanks to Hollywood, and it's pretty different from how things actually were. Just listen to Wyatt Earp himself. He totally blows up the whole myth of the quick-draw artist with this quote. He basically says, the guy who won the fight was the guy who took his time to actually aim. All that flashy stuff, like fanning the hammer, that was for show ponies, not for people who wanted to stay alive. That whole scene of two guys facing off on a dusty street at high noon almost completely made up for books and movies. Real gunfights were messy, they were sudden, and they were brutal. They were chaotic brawls that happened up close with everyone scrambling for cover. It was about ending the fight, not about looking cool. And that brings us to today. I mean, semi-automatic pistols have long since taken over for military and police. So why is it that this design, that's over 150 years old, still fascinates us so much? Well, for starters, history is valuable. Check out this number, $1.84 million. That's the price a single Colt Walker revolver, with its original case, sold for at auction. That's not just a gun. That's a priceless piece of history, and it's the most expensive single firearm ever sold. And then there's this debate that still rages on with gun fans. You've got Team Colt, the people who just love the beautiful, elegant lines of that open-top frame. They'll tell you it's, well, damn sexy. But then you've got Team Remington, who'll argue that their solid, closed-frame design was just plain stronger and functionally better. It's a classic fight, looks versus engineering. The thing is, the demand for these guns never really died. When TV westerns became a huge deal in the 1950s, a whole new generation wanted one, and Colt actually had to start making them again. Even today, you can still go out and buy a brand new single-action Army, which is just incredible. It's a real testament to how timeless that design is. So in the end, the whole story of the Revolver leaves us with this really interesting question. It was called the Peacemaker. It was called the Great Equalizer. But did putting that kind of incredible power into one person's hands actually create peace? Or did it just create a new and maybe more violent reality on the frontier? It's a question that really makes you think about the complicated dance between technology, power, and what we even mean by the word justice.